Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me at the Hackney History Festival. I shall move over because I think I'm in the way of the screen. We recently commemorated 80 years since VE Day. We reflect not only on victory but on the lives it changed and the cost it carried. Stoke Newington was heavily impacted. Bombs fell, buildings collapsed and lives were upended. But people came together in shelters through acts of kindness and with quiet resilience. There's a quote here. Vera Britton, a nurse, writer and pacifist, reflected on her experiences during the First World War. She wrote, "The human creatures who fought and suffered were not much more than names to those who stayed behind. In the Second World War, as in the First, those who stayed behind lived the war and many found purpose in peace." The poster for today's talk, on the left, features a drawing from 1939 by George Longhurst, a 27-year-old ARP warden from Beatty Road in Stoke Newington, just off Stoke Newington High Street. His work captures the strength of ordinary people, those who didn't carry weapons but carried communities. As we begin, let's remember not only those who fought, but also those who endured and those who helped rebuild. This 1903 photo shows my ancestors, the Wright family. Their lives, shaped by 2 world wars, reflect my culturally Jewish and refugee heritage, a legacy of survival, displacement and resilience. I've also experienced violence firsthand, surviving 4 terrorist bombings in London, including the 7th of July 2005 attacks, now approaching its 20th anniversary. Those events changed my life and deepened my commitment to understanding how people face conflict, loss and memory. That journey led me here to talk of my home in Stoke Newington, because the history of war is never distant. It shapes families, neighbourhoods and lives, and it endures not just in archives but in people. So after the 7th of July attacks, I made a life-changing decision. I left a 25-year career in advertising and creative design and returned to education to better understand history. That decision wasn't just professional, it was personal, a way to process what I had lived through and to explore the echoes of violence, survival and memories that I was aware of in my own family's past. I retrained as a historian at Goldsmiths and now focus on wartime narratives, especially how ordinary people respond to conflict and upheaval. Through public talks, archival work and writing, I try to bring the human side of history to life. This talk, like all my work, comes from a belief that history isn't distant, it lives in families and communities and in the stories we choose to remember. So, to understand wartime Stoke Newington, it helps first to know how it was defined. So from 1900 to 1965, it was an independent metropolitan borough, created under the London Government Act of 1899, with 2 coats of arms, one unofficial and an official version granted in 1934. Its boundaries ran from Woodbury down to Newington Green and from Green Lanes to the Crossway on the Hackney border. Before the war, it had over 50,000 residents, a number that dropped to just over 30,000 during hostilities, due to the evacuation of children and some whole families moving out due to bombing. The borough's motto was Respice, Prospice, look to the past and to the future, or as I like to say, learn from the past, look to the future, a fitting message for our journey today. So we've just seen how Stoke Newington was shaped, with the motto look to the past and the future, and that future would come quickly. The First World War began in July 1914, Britain entered on the 4th of August after Germany invaded Belgium. Less than a year later, Stoke Newington faced a terrifying new threat, aerial bombing. On the night of the 31st of May 1915, the German Zeppelin LZ-38 launched the first air raid on London, and the first bomb hit number 16 Alcombe Road near Stoke Newington Common. As bombs were dropped, Stoke Newington counted the first fatalities of this new type of warfare. 3-year-old Elsie Leggett was killed at 33 Cowper Road, and her sister Elizabeth May was fatally wounded. These silent airships stunned the public, a chilling prelude to the devastation of the next war. As the threat of another global war grew, so did the fear of civilian bombing. During the First World War, poison gas had caused nearly 100,000 deaths, and chemical weapons continued into the 1920s and 30s in conflicts like the Rif War and Mussolini's campaigns in North Africa. But it was the 1937 bombing of Guernica, where civilians were deliberately targeted, that truly shocked the world. It marked a turning point in modern warfare. In Britain, those fears led to policy. The Air Raid Precautions Act of 1937 required local authorities to begin planning for civilian protection. Stoke Newington acted quickly. Preparation began well before war was declared, and that moment would come sooner than many feared. After years of rising tension, Guernica, the Munich crisis, the invasion of Poland, the moment finally came. At 11:15 a.m. on Sunday the 3rd of September 1939, Britain declared war on Germany. At the same time, air raid sirens sounded across the country, including Stoke Newington. This should be going through speakers, by the way. There are no speakers. The sound triggered immediate fear. Londoners had been bracing for this, expecting bombers to arrive within hours. People rushed to shelters, certain that the first wave was coming, but it was a false alarm. No attack came that day. The real bombing wouldn't begin until the following year. But from that moment on, the war had begun, and for civilians, the home front became a battlefield of its own. 2 days before the air raid siren sounded on the 3rd of September, Stoke Newington Borough Council had suspended all but one committee group, the Emergency War Committee. This team brought together key local figures to coordinate the evacuation of many of the borough's children, known as Operation Pied Piper, the construction of shelters, public health initiatives, communications and food rationing. The rationing programme began in January 1940, with every man, woman and child issued a ration book with coupons, a scheme that would not end until July 1954. And of course, one of the committee's primary roles was the borough's defence. So the Emergency War Committee was led by, as you can see on the left, Town Hall Clerk C. Kent Wright, who was also an author, Chief Warden Major Crescent Atkinson, and it also included Marjorie Crescent Atkinson, her paintings on the right, his wife, who was a decorated pioneer in women's wartime services, along with engineers, medics and surveyors. Together, they formed the backbone of Stoke Newington's response, turning plans into action to protect the over 30,000 residents. So with the Emergency War Committee in place, Stoke Newington needed a central hub to manage its wartime response. That hub was the new Town Hall and Municipal Buildings Complex, based on Stoke Newington Church Street at the junction of Albion Road. Completed in 1937 and taking over from an old town hall that was situated in Milton Grove, became the borough's report and control centre for the duration of the war. From here, officials coordinated civil defence efforts, managed shelter planning and directed emergency services across the borough. The building was even camouflaged with paint to make it less visible from the air. And if you look closely today, some of that faded paint is still visible on the facade. Interestingly, while an English heritage plaque outside gives the date as 1939, when the borough records confirmed that actually the camouflage paint was applied between October and November 1940, once constant bombing had become a real threat. When the bombs began to fall, the true test wasn't just response, but readiness. The Air Raid Precautions, or ARP system, was designed to protect civilians and coordinate emergency services through a clear chain of command. from the Ministry of Home Security to regional authorities and down to the local boroughs like Stoke Newington. Within the borough, the area was divided into ARP sectors, each with its own post. The map on the right shows those wartime colour-coded sectors used to station wardens, rescue crews and medical teams. This structure allowed the ARP controller and chief warden to direct aid swiftly, a system that proved vital during the heaviest raids when every second counted. Once ARP sectors were set, it was up to local volunteers and emergency workers to bring the system to life. Stoke Newington's wartime response relied on a tightly coordinated team. Air raid wardens enforced blackouts to prevent enemy aircraft from spotting targets on the ground, guided people to shelters and reported bomb damage. Fire watchers tackled incendiaries and aided the wounded. Rescue teams handled collapsed buildings, shoring them up and recovery. First aid ambulance and stretcher parties delivered urgent medical care, and gas decontamination units prepared for chemical attacks, which thankfully never came. At the heart of this all was the Town Hall's Report and Control Centre, coordinating every response in real time. Also playing a key role in civil defence on the eve of war was the old Town Hall building designated as Milton Grove Depot. Apart from being the main ARP warden's post, it became one of only 10 official ARP training schools in the country, established in 1938 to train civilians in air raid precautions, first aid and emergency response. In July 1938, the depot made headlines when 6 nuns attended Stoke Newington's first ARP classes, part of a pioneering group of 37 men. Their involvement marked a significant step in bringing women into frontline civil defence roles. Though the original building is gone, Milton Grove's role in preparing local people, especially women, for wartime emergency work remains a powerful story of resilience and community effort. But more than just a central warden's post and training school, Milton Grove Depot also served as Stoke Newington's ARP equipment distribution hub. One of its key responsibilities was issuing gas masks to ensure that every resident, even infants, had protection in the event of a gas attack. On the left, a nurse demonstrates a baby respirator, a stark reminder of the era's fears, but also of the care and preparedness behind civil defence efforts. For young children, the gas respirator on the right, commonly known as the Mickey Mouse gas mask, was designed with bright colours and cartoon-like shapes to make the experience less frightening. At the centre, taken from the Mildmay Club in Newington Green, the Mildmay Club's archives, is a local distribution notice. It provided instructions to families and roads ranging from Allen Road to Newington Green on how and where to collect their protective equipment, a reminder of the urgent neighbour-to-neighbour action that defined the wartime home front. As bombing would intensify, it wasn't just about being prepared. It was about responding quickly and locally. Across Stoke Newington, familiar buildings were repurposed into ARP posts and first aid stations, vital to the borough's emergency response. On the left is St Mary's Church Rooms on Defoe Road, known during the war as Church Street Depot. It coordinated wardens, rescue teams and emergency supplies for several sector posts. On the right is the old Clissold swimming baths, now rebuilt as the Clissold Leisure Centre on Clissold Road. During the war, it served as a first aid post, performing emergency operations and treating the injured before transfer to hospital, often during raids and under blackout conditions. These weren't purpose-built facilities, but adapted spaces that saved lives night after night. Alongside the first aid post, Stoke Newington prepared for one of the most feared threats of the time, gas attacks. On Clissold Road, next to the old public swimming baths, was a purpose-built cleansing and decontamination station. You can see it's marked on the left, showing how integrated civil defence planning had become. These stations were equipped to wash off chemical agents, issue clean clothing, and treat those exposed to contamination. Staff wore protective gear, as seen in the image on the right, working in high-risk conditions to assist civilians. Thankfully, poison gas was never used against Britain in the Second World War, but the fear was real, and facilities like this were a constant reminder of how total war reached into every corner of daily life. Even with all the planning, not every outcome could be prevented. For those who lost their homes in raids, rest centres became essential. Schools and church halls were quickly repurposed to offer emergency shelter, food and clothing. On the left is the sign for Church Street School, today's William Patton, which served as one such rest centre. In the middle, a Ministry of Health poster reminded people that if you were bombed out, a policeman or warden could direct you to safety. But for others, the destination was more final. On the right, coloured in red, St Andrew's Church Hall on Bethune Road was repurposed as a temporary mortuary. Another was based at St Olave's near Manor House Tube Station. These quiet corners of the borough carried some of the heaviest burdens, tending to the living and the dead through the darkest nights of the war. Air raid wardens being most visible on the streets were the backbone of Stoke Newington's civil defence. The list in the centre shows some of the borough's designated ARP wardens posts, set up in schools, synagogues, churches and private homes. Post C2, for example, based at Walford Road Synagogue, where George Longhurst, our talk poster artist and volunteer, served throughout the war. On the left, we see Mrs. A.M. Fordham, one of London's many female wardens, at her post, jokingly called Ritz Hotel. These volunteers monitored bomb damage, enforced blackouts and guided neighbours to safety. And on the right, a quiet moment, wardens taking the opportunity to drink some tea after dealing with another night of bombing. These were extraordinary people doing extraordinary work. As we've seen, Stoke Newington's borough-wide ARP system was vast and well organised, but also deeply human. This slide brings us closer to the individuals behind the effort. Pictured here is Charles Charlie Gilson, an ARP warden and also secretary of the Marway Club just off Newington Green. His uniform shows the original Stoke Newington ARP patch, a symbol of local pride and commitment. The borough wardens and ARP staff even had their own ARP magazines, one called Warden's Post, and this one, SNAR, short for Stoke Newington Air Raid Precautions. These magazines, produced until early 1940, carried updates, jokes, and reminders of ARP techniques, as well as a SNAR song, which I'm not going to sing, shown here, giving a rare glimpse of the wartime humour, gritty, defiant, and full of community spirit. From detailed organisation to human resilience, the ARP was both a logistical machine and a local lifeline. Building on the warden's work, we turn now to the front line of emergency response, rescue and first aid. On the left, the Stoke Newington Rescue Party stands proud outside the camouflaged town hall during a national savings drive, which was called War Weapons Week from 1941. Their readiness was vital during the raids. In the centre, an ambulance driver stands at the ambulance station based at Central School, now Grassmere, on Albion Road, as part of wartime health services. And on the right is a sobering image from October 1940, showing the aftermath of the Coronation Avenue bombing, which we will look at shortly in more detail. Rescue teams and stretcher parties worked in dangerous, unstable conditions, again, ordinary people risking their lives to save others. As the air raids continued to intensify, firefighting became a vital part of civil defence. The Auxiliary Fire Service, or AFS, was formed to support the regular fire brigade and respond to fires caused by bombing. Local sites, such as Princess May School on Stoke Newington Road, were converted into AFS stations, as well as serving as a warden's post. These images show AFS crews in action, including black British firefighters who served with courage, though they were often overlooked in official records. In the far left, and second from the right, is AFS volunteer Fernando Enrique, born in Jamaica. He later earned a PhD and became a lecturer in social anthropology, a remarkable journey that began with wartime service. The AFS worked in close coordination with wardens, medics and rescue teams to protect both people and buildings throughout the borough. By 1941, the growing threat of bombing led the government to merge local fire brigades and the auxiliary fire service into one national body called the National Fire Service. This brought better coordination and broader inclusion across communities. Among those who served was Herbert Roberts, a firefighter in Stoke Newington, but he was also known for something quite special. To local children, he wasn't just a first responder, he was also the teddy bear doctor. Between raids, he would collect damaged soft toys, repair them, and return them to the young owners. In a time of fear and loss, that simple generosity meant everything, and also it's the beginning of the repair shop. Before we return to the harsh realities of the air raids, let's pause to consider a plan that never actually materialised, but reveals how seriously Stoke Newington prepared for war. Before war had ever begun, in the spring of 1939, the council adopted a proposal developed by Dr. Oscar Faber, a pioneering structural engineer renowned for his work in reinforced concrete and major wartime infrastructure. The proposal was a system of deep-level tunnel shelters designed to withstand bombs, fire, shrapnel, and even poison gas. The projected cost for this scheme was £500,000, an enormous sum at the time, and ultimately the Home Office never approved the plan, and the shelters were never built. Still, the proposal stands as a testament to how, even before the first siren sounded, Stoke Newington was thinking ahead, with its expertise, ambition, and a clear commitment to protecting its people. While the deep-level shelters were never built, Stoke Newington did achieve a national first. It became home to the UK's first purpose-built basement shelters in a council-built block of flats, with capacity for over 250 people. The Hewling estate was part of a 1938 London County Council initiative to replace substandard housing. It included Hewling House, Matthias House and Derwent House, built on the site of the former Hewling Street, between Howard Road and Matthias Road. During the war, Derwent House was destroyed by bombing, but both Hewling House and Matthias House survived, remaining in residential use today. Alongside basement and deep-level shelter proposals, Stoke Newington saw the construction of more than 50 surface street shelters. These were designed to hold between 12 and 48 people each, and offered quick access protection for anyone caught outside during an air raid. The borough even featured in the national press, with half-built shelters portrayed as a cheerful wartime innovation, a home from home, complete with captions promising comfort and safety. But the reality was far grimmer. Residents often complained that the shelters were dark, damp and unhygienic, sometimes even structurally unsafe. Far from feeling like a refuge, they were frequently feared rather than trusted. Cold concrete and little privacy meant that these shelters, while visible symbols of preparedness, rarely brought peace of mind. At the start of the war, the most common outside shelter was the Anderson shelter, in many cases issued free to people and families with gardens. Made from corrugated steel, it was buried 4 feet deep and covered with earth to absorb blast. It wasn't bomb-proof, but it provided solid protection from shrapnel and shock waves. More than 2,000 Anderson shelters were distributed in Stoke Newington alone. I can't find one, so if anyone has one, tell me. For those without gardens or outside space, the Morrison shelter was introduced in 1941. Designed for indoor use, it looked like a steel-framed table with wire mesh sides, built to shelter a family during an air raid. In many homes, it doubled up as a kitchen or dining table by day and a place of relative safety at night. As an alternative to Anderson shelters, by September 1940, around 250 domestic surface shelters designed for 6 to 12 people were built in Stoke Newington gardens. These were made to standard designs with brick walls and reinforced concrete roofs, built above ground but intended to withstand nearby blasts. Remarkably, 2 of these shelters still survive, one in Lordship Grove and one in Lordship Road, a short walk from the Town Hall Reporting and Control Centre on Church Street. The centre image shows the child John Patrick Donovan after the war in his Lordship Road garden. John was a long-time resident who lived in the same house until his sad passing very, very recently. In Stoke Newington, over 1,000 residential basements were reinforced during the war. One known example, surviving example, is at a house in Oldfield Road. Pam, who has lived there since 1939, shared her vivid memories of life in the shelter. We had our cellar reinforced with iron girders and corrugated iron. The coal hole by the front doorstep was removed and enlarged to make an escape hatch. There were bunk beds down there, and after the war, my father turned them into a workbench, the springs still showing. My memories of spending night after night lying in that bunk bed, listening to the sound of bombs falling and being frightened out of my life are still permanently with me. Pam's memories remind us that for many, the home front was no less frightening than the front line. Even shops and businesses played a key role in civil defence and protection of citizens. In early 1940, the Emergency War Committee funded a programme to reinforce commercial basements. 35 shelters were completed along the borough's busiest streets. One of them, designated shelter number 16, beneath 163 to 167 Church Street, was fitted with bunks for 54 people, as well as heating and sanitation. It was regularly used by residents, shop staff and passers-by. During air raids, the rector of St Mary's, with the most appropriate name, Reverend Standfast, held weekly services there. In the parish magazine of February 1941, and while new bunks were being installed, he wrote, "Number 16 shelter was in a state of upheaval, but little things like that made no difference. The congregation sat on piles of timber and joined in the service with the usual enthusiasm." So, Shelter 16 was more than a refuge. It was a space where people came together, prayed together, and made the best of what they had. Here's another example of a reinforced basement used as a public shelter, this time at 42 to 46 Church Street, with its entrance entered on Summerhouse Road. During the war, this site was designated shelter number 24, requisitioned and upgraded for public use. It features a 4-inch reinforced concrete ceiling and visible joists. What's even more remarkable is what else still survives. This in situ original 1944 poster by artist Harold Pym, who my late father worked with during the war, but that's another story for another time. This poster advertises a local wartime public exhibition, giving us another evidence of subterranean daily life. Of all the purpose-built shelters, the largest, often referred to as trench shelters, were designed to protect large numbers of civilians in densely populated areas. One of the biggest stood in the gardens of Newington Green, on the Stoke Newington-Islington border, with space for up to 1,600 people. While no known photographs survive, it likely resembled the trench shelter at Islington Green, shown here. The Islington Green shelter was officially opened in 1939 by Lord Privy Seal and ARP Minister Sir John Anson, and promoted widely as a standard model for use across London and Newington Green. Underground stations too became vital places of refuge. For Stoke Newington, that place would be Manor House Tube Station. At its peak, it could shelter, or so they said, over 3,000 people, but when bunk beds were added later, the capacity was reduced to around 700. Nevertheless, it allowed for overnight stays in relative safety and with a bit more comfort. From the 7th of September 1940 to the 11th of May 1941, the period known as the Blitz, the borough was struck by a range of Nazi German bombs. Incendiaries designed to ignite fires and overwhelm emergency services, parachute mines, which drifted silently down before detonating with immense force, and high explosive bombs capable of levelling entire buildings in seconds. The mock-up video in the centre gives a stark sense of how the borough, with its camouflage report and patrol centre, may have looked and sounded during this intense period of raids. This would be the ultimate test of every plan devised by the Emergency War Committee and the resilience of its residents enduring night after night of bombardment. And it wasn't just strategy that was tested, bricks and mortar bore the full impact. West Hackney Parish Church, a neoclassical landmark at the junction of Stoke Newington Road and Amherst Road, was so badly damaged it was later demolished. Although there were many destructive nights, one of the worst came on the 13th of October 1940, when clusters of high explosive wreaked havoc across the borough. St Mary's Old Church by Clissold Park was hit 3 times, while another blast shattered the stained glass windows of the Victorian-built St Mary's Church across the road. These attacks marked both physical and symbolic losses, reminders that no part of community life was untouched by war. Bombs struck homes, businesses, places of worship, schools, and the surrounding streets, each hit changing lives in seconds. But on that night of the 13th of October 1940, one event would stand out as Stoke Newington's darkest moment with the Blitz, the Coronation Avenue disaster. Coronation Avenue and Imperial Avenue, both off Stoke Newington Road, were streets that included over 300 flats and fronted by 18 shops. They were completed in 1903 by the 4% Industrial Dwellings Company, primarily to provide affordable housing for Jewish residents who had moved up from the East End. These buildings stood side by side, part of the borough's everyday residential life, until suddenly everything changed. That night, the worst fears of residents became real. A 250-kilogram bomb hit Coronation Avenue, crashing through 5 floors before exploding in the basement, directly where public air raid shelter number 5 was located. The entire structure collapsed, plunging those inside the shelter into darkness, rubble, and chaos. 2 sections of the shelter were completely sealed off. Gas and water started pouring in through broken mains. In one corner, a small group managed to reach an escape hatch, clinging to the faintest chance of survival. But for many, there was no escape. Over 160 people, including whole families, were killed. This was one of the deadliest single bombing incidents of the Blitz, not just in Stoke Newington, but in the whole of London. After the Coronation Avenue bombing, families searched desperately for loved ones. The blast was so severe, many victims couldn't be identified. While some were buried privately, most named and unknown were laid to rest in a mass grave at Hackney Park Cemetery. In a rare gesture, Protestants, Catholics and Jews were buried side by side, honoured in a joint service by local faith leaders. In 1948, Stoke Newington Borough Council unveiled a memorial in the cemetery, reading aloud each victim's name in a multi-faith act of remembrance. And in 2011, following a grassroots campaign, a new plaque was placed at the site of the bombing. BBC journalist George Alagaya led the ceremony, joined by survivors, relatives and first responders who remembered that night. Amid the devastation, there were many acts of extraordinary bravery, none more so than that of Albert James Sandridge, a member of Hackney's ARP rescue party. During the air raid, as water rose to dangerous levels in the bomb shelter, Sandridge found a woman trapped. Tying a rope around himself and this poor woman, he continuously stayed underwater, pushing to try and keep her afloat and breathing. Just before the ceiling was near collapse, and Sandridge, being at the point of exhaustion, he ultimately saved her life. For this selfless bravery, he was awarded the George Medal. Years later, in 1964, Sandridge's story took another remarkable turn. His medal had gone missing in 1946, left in a purse in a telephone box by his wife Florence, and thought lost forever. Then, amazingly, 80 years later, she unexpectedly spotted a listing for an auction in a national newspaper. And thanks to her discovery and a hasty withdrawal by Sotheby's, the medal was finally returned to Sandridge, then aged 64, bringing his story full circle. While residents faced bombing and the hardship at home, their thoughts also turned to those fighting abroad. To support the war effort, the government launched national savings drives, public campaigns encouraging citizens to lend money to fund military equipment. These included themed weeks like All Weapons Week, Warship Week, and Wings for Victory, with each event aiming to raise funds for tanks, ships, and aircraft. Communities rallied together with parades and exhibitions, all aimed at hitting local fundraising targets. In Warship Week, the borough's efforts were so successful that 2 ships were named in its honour. First HMS Ibis, launched by the Mayoress, Miss Gordon, and later, after the Ibis was lost in action, the HMS Mermaid. These were more than just symbolic gestures. They were a mark of how deeply communities were invested in victory. Momentum from earlier fundraising continued in 1943, when Stoke Newington joined the Wings for Victory campaign. In just 1 week, residents raised over £459,000, exceeding their £400,000 target. Today that's around £17 million. Their efforts funded the equivalent of 9 Lancaster bombers and 19 Spitfires, a remarkable contribution from a single borough. While most aircraft records were lost, one logbook remains, MD 905, a Lancaster bomber funded by Stoke Newington and assigned to number 103 Squadron. It flew 25 missions with a mixed crew from Britain, Australia and Canada. On its final operation on the 3rd of May 1944, it was sadly shot down over France with the loss of all 7 crew members. Their story is a powerful reminder. Behind every poster and parade were real people and real lives sent into danger, supported by their communities at home. While most wartime threats came from the skies, another danger lurked closer to home: political extremism and betrayal. In June 1940, Rex Freeman and his mother Violet, both living in Kynaston Road, were arrested and found guilty of spreading pro-German propaganda. They had promoted and distributed stickers advertising a German radio station disguised as a British one. Rex was also found in possession of illegal ammunition and neo-Nazi propaganda material. This wasn't just a case of misinformation, it was treated as active sabotage during one of the most vulnerable moments in the war. Behind their actions lay a deeper context: the rise of British fascism. Oswald Mosley and his British Union fascists had gained ground in London during the 1930s, and though banned once war began, its influence persisted during and after the war. The Freeman case reminds us that wartime unity was never guaranteed and had to be defended, not just from bombs and invasion, but from dangerous ideologies within our streets. As the war turned against Germany, Hitler launched the Vergeltungswaffe, or vengeance weapons, in a last-ditch effort amid intense Allied bombing from mid-1944. The V1, an early cruise missile carrying a 900-kilo warhead, was followed by the V2, the world's first long-range ballistic missile, weighing 12,500 kilos and stretching an enormous 14 metres in length. More than 1,400 V2s were fired at London. Stoke Newington was hit by 6 V1s between June and August 44, followed at least by 4 V2 attacks between November 44 and January 45. These new weapons arrived without warning and caused widespread destruction. In the next slide, we'll look more closely at the impact of just one of those strikes on Stoke Newington. In Newington Green, on the border of Islington, bomb damage was especially severe on both sides of the green. On the 16th of November 1944, the area was directly hit by the most powerful weapon ever used on British soil, the V2 rocket. Gerald Bleakman, who lived just 200 metres away at 55 Newington Green, recalled being jolted awake around 3 a.m. when the rocket struck his former school. The blast shattered his windows, sending shards of glass into the wall above his bed like darts. Wrapped in blankets on that cold night, he managed to escape injury. These rockets gave no warning, travelling at 2,000 miles an hour, faster than the speed of sound. The explosion arrived before the sound ever did. Finally, after nearly 6 years of fear, separation, and unimaginable loss, VE Day marked the end of fighting in Europe. Across Stoke Newington, communities came together in joyful, heartfelt street parties, like those shown here on Oldfield Road and Sydney Road. People weren't just celebrating victory alone, they were celebrating survival, peace, and the end of violence in Europe. It was a time to grieve, and a time to honour the memory of those who were lost, and cherish the resilience of neighbours who stood together through the darkest years. These gatherings remind us that while war tried to divide, peace had the potential to unite on every street and in every heart. As the dust settled, the next challenge would be to rebuild homes and hope. Across Stoke Newington, the devastation was visible in every street. Examples like the Hawksley Court estate, which rose out of the ruins of the devastation of high explosive bombs, and specifically a parachute mine that had exploded in November 1941. And additionally, with a shortage of housing, prefabricated houses, or prefabs, sprang up on other bomb sites, offering shelter like these at Albion Road Farnborough near Albion Parade. These new homes were modest, but for families who had lost everything, they represented security, recovery, and a chance to begin again. What emerged was more than reconstruction. It was a testament to the strength and resilience of this community. As we reflect on the stories you've heard today, from courage and resistance to destruction and survival, we're reminded of the cost of conflict. This quote from Einstein speaks to that enduring truth. Peace cannot be kept by force, it can only be achieved by understanding. So let us carry forward the memory of those who endured, those who rebuilt, not to glorify war, but to better understand peace and our responsibility to protect it. I hope this talk has offered not only a clearer understanding of the hardships this community faced, but also a deeper appreciation for their strengths, their solidarity, and quiet acts of courage that help them endure. May it also remind us of the power of compassion, the importance of standing up against injustice, and our shared responsibility to help build a more peaceful future for us all. Thank you very much for joining me on this journey today. Any questions? Would anybody like to ask a question before we finish? Yes?
Did schools generally close down, given that most of the kids have been evacuated?
Sorry, please say that.
Did schools close down during the war?
No.
Those kids?
A lot of schools stayed open. So, for example, one of the ones I mentioned, which was Church Street School, which is now Patton, would do a few 2 or 3 hours a day if they could, so like a half day. And actually, there are times when there was a lady called Pam who had her basement set up. So she went to William Patton or Church Street School, and she remembers going there, and there was an air raid, and the teachers that were there, they went into the ground floor, the lessons were on the first floor, and the teacher said, get on the ground. So they went on the ground and said, don't move until the all clear siren goes. And when the all clear siren went, she looked up and she saw all these people dazed and covered in dust, and realised that her school wasn't just about teaching them for a few hours, but it was also like a refuge for people, and it really stuck with her. So one of the memories that she was talking about about 3 or 4 weeks ago. So yes, some were, I don't know about all of them, but some were requisitioned, like Princess May was probably fully taken over by the AFS and the wardens, and the one in Albion Road, which is now Grasmere School, Central School, had the ambulance substation and an AFS substation, but they tried to fit in education when they could, but not much education. Yes?
Thanks very much. One of the benefits of being an identical twin was we've got a double rations. One of the advantages of being an identical twin was we've got double rations in the restaurant.
Did you?
So that was pretty good. And my dad was in the IFS, the Auxiliary Fire Service, and they did actually use the schools a lot.
Yes.
And my dad tells me that he remembers looking at the children's exercise books that the evacuated people. But one of the more serious bit is I've been reading Jerry White's book on the Second World War. He was much more critical of the IRP in London, so it was a bit of a mess. Was Stoke Newington a flower in that mess?
In 40 minutes you have to give a brief journey. Everything has its problems. Every organisation has its problems. You had the ARP, first of all, wardens weren't like at the beginning, because when the so-called phony war, when there were no bombs, they just looked like they were playing darts, having a pint, having a good time, telling people to, close your curtains, and they were not liked. Same with the AFS, because they weren't doing much. As soon as the bombs started, the Blitz happened, the attitude changed quite a lot. Right. I think it's a bit like COVID, the beginning or a certain time people are like, oh God, I really need to do this. And then, I know people forgot that, but when people started actually dying, and we were seeing pictures of people in hospital beds, the reality hit, and then suddenly, hopefully, most people's attitudes changed. But there was also department rivalry. Wardens didn't like certain people. The AFS were looked down upon by professional firemen. I mean, you have to remember that the fire system was each local area had its own local fire system, and sometimes if there was a big fire and you had two lots of local systems coming together, the pipes might not fit because it was not standardised. So there's a lot of, so eventually by 1941, especially after the Blitz again, they said this is ridiculous. We have to have a national fire service, so we have to coordinate. So I think, like anything, as time goes on, experience hopefully tightens things up. I hope that's answered the question. Yes.
I'm always amazed when people talk about the Second World War, when people say things like, so they just got 2,000 Anderson shelters and put them up. I just wondered, when you, if looking from the sort of a council point of view,
Yes.
how did they go about getting, for example, that or all the iron structures or all the concrete and the people to project? Where did it all come from?
That's a very, very, very good question. So the interesting question, the interesting thing with Stoke Newington is, again, they were ahead of the game. The borough surveyor and the main engineer for Stoke Newington, for some reason, I don't know what they knew was going on, we bought in an enormous amount of steel before the war. So, in terms of shoring things up, they had plenty of steel, lots of places didn't. Islington, by the way, had the very first Anderson shelter in the country. Unfortunately, Stoke Newington didn't get that. But what tended to happen was it came from central government, and then local boroughs would have to ask for them, and obviously to do with materials depending on what was available. But luckily, because Stoke Newington had this vast amount of steel, it had a connection with Dr. Oscar Faber, who was this reinforced concrete structure engineer. They were ahead of the game. I mean, they were thinking quite early. So, I mean, there were millions of Anderson shelters eventually. By the end of the war, there were millions across the country.
I've always just wondered who did all the work. I mean, if I suddenly was told to do a 4-foot deep hole in my garden,
well, two things. If you knew, 1 minute, okay, so very quickly. You'd have to do it yourself, most of the time. Or if you were lucky, some people were next to builders, merchants and stuff. I mean, most of the people in the rescue, shoring and demolition were ordinary people. They were labourers, carpenters, chippies, stonelayers and painters and whatever. They were ordinary people, but they sort of moved from their normal job and they went into something like this. So they had experience. They're like, well, instead of building someone's house or a council flat, we're going to have to build shelters. So sometimes you have to pay for it, sometimes you have to do it yourself. And people who didn't, if they bought or got free a Anderson shelter and they didn't put them up within a certain time, they would check and they would find them. It was wasting resources. I think we're going to have to got one more question. No, very, very brief.
Just one more. Just quickly, world history. Could I just take this opportunity to remind people? I was in Odessa in Ukraine last week.
Right.
In an area, and I took children down to the shelter.
There you go.
In the school. It's happening now.
Yes.
It's not. It's history, but remember, it's happening in Europe.
I
now,
think
just a reminder.
what I would say is my talk, every time I write, when I was writing talk, I talk about, it's for me talking about everything that happens now,
Absolutely.
and the reasons behind it, and why we need to kiss. It's not distant, it's been here, it might be far away now, but it's also with us, and we mustn't forget that. Anyway, thank you very much.